Hello YouTube, isn't today a great day to be a Pokemon trading card game fan? Here we're looking at this Sinischa EX deck. This is the deck I pulled a couple months back when looking ahead at the first release of Budew into the format through Prismatic Evolutions and different decks trying to figure out what we're going to do around item lock. I built it before Prismatic came out. I played it for several weeks after I built it. I had my wife play it. It's a great deck. My goal here with videos like this is to look at a deck slightly deeper than a deck list. I'll show it to you here. I'll be referencing it throughout the video, but I don't like talking off of the deck lists. I like to lay out a deck and maybe with some more visuals and better ways to show more information than maybe the card text itself. Talk about a deck in depth. And maybe we can learn something together more, or you can learn a little bit more about a deck from just reading the cards. So let's get into it. Sinischa EX is definitely a rogue deck. I'm not going to pretend like it's a meta contender. However, at my small locals, I went 3 weeks in a row winning with it. I went and tried Giratina and Lugia again because of post-rotation coming up, so my wife picked it up, and she then went 3 weeks in a row going 3-0 with it. So it's not a bad deck in any amount. I'm just not going to pretend like it'll go and win a regionals anytime soon. It is not a two-prize beat stick deck, although it can be played like it. The out of using the baby Sinistchas that we'll look at deeper in a moment makes it very easy to play the odd prize trade encounters, opening up a bit deeper of prize trade, and what I'd argue makes the deck that much easier to play, so you're not worried losing in a 2-2-2 way. If your opponents have enough gust, sure, they can manage it, but not everyone has gust every turn, as we know, so I enjoy that deck for that reason. So let's take a little bit closer look at the deck and how it runs. Now, my goal here is not just to read a bunch of cards off to you folks, because you probably know what they all do already, but I'll talk about it in a kind of macro sense. As far as Pokemon search, we have Bug Catcher set, 4 Nest Balls, we play 2 Ultra Balls, and we have the Night Stretchers pull the discard because we play plenty of discard in the deck. So being able to pull those Pokemon out of the discard is useful for looping. Because it's a grass deck, the Bug Catching set moves great to go find Ogerpons, find your grass Pokemon, and find energy to help draw. Yes, this is a lot of items for Pokemon search, but because of the heavy draw and the heavy amount of energy, Budew doesn't stop this deck as hard as other decks like Charizard, so I would not worry about playing this deck in a heavy Budew format. We play 3 copies of the basic Poltchageist, 3 of the baby Sinischa, and 2 of the Sinischa EX. I have those Ultra Balls here to designate that, you have those defined evolutions. You have obviously 4 Ogerpons, the 1 Wyrdeer, the 1 Budew, and the 1 Tatsugiri. Tatsugiri, I find myself probably using the least in this deck, but the early game dig for that Carmine, mid game dig for an Iono or Professor's Research, or a late game boss is useful, so it cannot be understated. It stays in this list from the original list I pulled it from. Now, if we squint our eyes a little bit and ignore the Pokemon and just look at their outputs, we find that Sinischa, the baby, has a 1 attack that moves 4 damage counters around. That's on any Pokemon if we look closer. So it doesn't have to be all in one, and that's actually really useful to make some math work in some different situations. The main attack I'm going to be using with that baby Sinischa is its 70 to 210 damage attack, where it does 70 per grass energy or discard. Pretty obvious how you want to get them in play, mostly through the Ogerpons. Spill the Tea as an attack synergizes very well with the Sinischa EX as a Pokemon. It does have a more straightforward attack that is Matcha Splash for 120, healing your Pokemon. I don't see it used a lot. The few times I have used it have only been in situations where I've done its first attack and then didn't have any grass energy in the discard to utilize. We'll go over that in a second. And just needed another punch. So you're not going to use Matcha Slash that often, and as we know in this format, or in the modern Pokemon game, maybe in a Dragapult type situation, the healing damage from the Pokemon isn't doing crazy work. It depends. If you're a better player than me, you're probably using it pretty well against a Dragapult matchup. The really cool move here is the Rebrew that puts 2 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon for each basic grass energy card in the discard pile. So I have it set as a base 10, because in order to use this attack you have to have at least 1 grass energy there, but that can go up to 360 if in a certain situation you have all 18 grass energy in the discard pile. That's probably not going to happen too often. In fact, it's very, very rare that I'm hitting above that 280 mark when I played the deck, but it is there, and if you push for it, you can get some nasty knockouts that way. Now we can look at the Teal Mask Ogerpon EX. Most people are significantly more aware of this Pokemon. You attach an energy, you draw a card. It does damage per the energy attached to it. I have it set as a base 150. In order for it to swing, it has to have that 3 grass energy attached, so I just have it as a base 150. And technically, this is swinging for significantly more, but very rarely are we going to see Pokemon that have more than 3. I'd say average is 2, but more than 3 is like significantly more and more rare. So I just kind of have it as that 300 as a, hey, you're probably hitting the 150 to 200 mark most of the time, but the potential is there. Wyrdeer V sucks that it's rotating soon, but a great addition in this heavy energy attachment deck. In order for it to use this attack, its base is 120, but if we look at the 18 grass energy we have in the deck, the 720 max is way more feasible to see than the max Sinischa EX. You don't need the 720, so you're probably not going to purposely do that too often, but it's pretty easy to pull off with a turn or two of attaching grass energy with the Ogerpon. Budew, obvious answer, it's easy to get through both the Nest Balls and the bug catching sets. It is not a necessary part of the flow, but if you feel like you're not setting up great, go for it. It's too easy. Similar with the Tatsugiri, I don't go for it too often when setting up if I have the right pieces, but it's great to get you out of stickier situations and raise your consistency pretty high. We do have a number of our supporters and texts over here. The spec is that prime catcher, so we're playing 4 different gusting outs. You know the situations they apply. The hand disruption's good, and you don't always want to discard your hand. Iono's is here. There's 3 Carmines in this deck, because early grass discard can really help you get going. The 2 Earthen Vessels, same thing, discard, search. And the 1 of Kieran. I feel like the 1 of Kieran is just one of those Japanese deck inclusions where they're more likely to do funkier stuff, I'd say, and test more. I don't see myself, or at least I never saw myself using Kieran that often. I'm not saying I never used it. Sometimes the switch without having to discard a grass energy is the little bit of math you need to make Wyrdeer work. Sometimes the plus 30 fixes some math that you didn't have before on an EX. But you could probably cut Kieran and replace it with something else and probably never notice. Looking up here, I have a matrix of discarding energies, just the different ways this deck is designed to discard energy. It's kind of obvious that getting it discarded to use that Sinistcha EX is a big part of the deck. I have a snapshot, hey, this is how the different ways to do it. The most obvious way is Sinistcha EX, spill the tea, discarding up to 3 to do its attack. I'm very often swinging for the full 210, even if it's a basic 70 HP Pokemon I'm swinging onto, just to get that extra going. Some players may think it's obvious, but other players just won't think about it as much. Whenever possible, pushing a Pokemon just to be able to retreat the energy off of it, especially these Ogerpons that you're always attaching energy to, can be the 2 to 3 extra energy, which is that, 20 to 60 damage with that Sinistcha EX over the course of a couple of turns that you might need to get those bigger knockouts that you wouldn't otherwise get because you're not thinking about it a big learning point for me and my wife when playing the deck. And I'll compare it to Gardevoir in that sense, where sometimes you push something just to be able to get an extra energy attached, retreated off of it to get that discard pile to use for that damage. Carmine and the Professor's Research are a bit obvious. They discard your hand. Technically, you could have significantly more grass energy than 3 in your hand. I'm just trying to be realistic with the numbers. But they just discard whatever you have in hand, so it's not necessarily just 3. Earthen Vessel, pretty straightforward. You discard the 1, find 2. Ultra Ball, you can discard 2 grass energy to find Pokemon. Things you know. But just a snapshot of, hey, this deck is designed to discard energy. Now, over here I have a really loose show of the different turns of the deck. I definitely need to develop a better way of doing this further in my Pokemon deck flow type videos, but it kind of gives you an idea of how my brain thinks when I'm playing this deck, right? I try to get a couple of these Ogerpons down and try to get at least 1 Poltchageist, preferably 2. A really big learning point when playing this was I like playing this deck first turn going first, right? That allows me to use Carmine to discard and get stuff going, but it also allows me to get an energy on that Teal Mass Ogerpon EX early, because it allows me to, on a turn 2, attach return and Teal Dance to it and then swing. There is not a way in this deck, maybe a friend situation with 3 Ogerpon EXs and a Wyrdeer, but there is not a consistent way to swing first turn going second with this deck. So it doesn't make sense to me to put yourself in that situation, because if you go first turn going first, that allows you to have a out of the Teal Mass Ogerpon EX attach Teal Dance, and Teal Dance over 2 turns, or even attach the Poltchageist into Sinischa and start swinging with a T. So I cannot overemphasize the importance of going first with this deck, just with getting stuff rolling. Now, the deck has different lanes it takes. It's pretty obvious the different lanes. There's that get a bunch of energy in play to swing with Wyrdeer, or get a bunch of energy in the discard with the Sinischa EX. But they do roll into each other. So if I'm swinging 2 or 3 times the Sinischa first, it makes sense to then roll into a Sinischa EX to rebrew, right? But if I'm against a 2-prize beat stick deck, you can get a solid knockout with that Wyrdeer, getting a bunch of energy onto it, get it knocked out, putting that 5 to 10 energy into the discard pile, which allows you to seamlessly go into the Sinischa after that to get a solid knockout with that damage range. So it flows pretty straightforward in one or the other. You just have to prize map and know which way you're going to take it, so you don't miss the important 2 to 3 energy that can really mess you up if you don't have it in the discard for that rebrew. If I were to think about strengths and weaknesses this deck has, I would hesitate, because I'm not overtly sure that the main weaknesses this deck is it can struggle to output proper damage the way you need it to. The 1 prize hitting for 210 is great, but in a format of Iron Hands, you're kind of losing that back and forth. And the Sinischa EX, as I keep pushing, the rebrew attack is a great, nasty bench hit for a big number, but isn't as consistent as a big attack that Wyrdeer can put out. And once Wyrdeer rotates, this deck, already in a strong rogue status, will drop off. In a Charizard heavy format, this tech eats. It is very, very easy to be a Charizard player with this. Even when Charizard would height with the attached return, double Teal Dance over 2 turns into an attack, just eats Charizards. And I feel like if Zorwark became the meta pick in a future format, this deck will also shine through there. At the same time, if it was up against a beat stick deck, If it's not hitting those one-shot knockouts, it'll struggle to keep up because that 210 doesn't hit the 220s, 230s, 240s that it needs, and can struggle in the back and forth if you're not setting up a bunch of these Poltergeists and filtering them through, because those two basic decks most of the time are running that Iron Hands. Now, if it was a Miraidon deck, I would try to push the Sinischa EX back and forth as good as well as we can, because I would try to punch into an Iron Hands with the Sinischa EX, because the Iron Hands is not one-shotting the Sinischa EX. So you can loosen it up and then finish it over 2 attacks. Other than the Iron Hands, the Sinischa here is great against doing 210 to a bunch of bigger guys and then following up that curse drop to make that 210, that 230, 240 to get multiple big prizes that way. That is how I would play against those 2 prize basic decks. You have a couple gusts to be able to hit the boss, hit the Fez and Ogerpon EXs of a Raging Bolt and those style of decks. So I'm not that worried about them because they're designed to get big numbers, and sure, they'll be one-shotting you, but they need several gusts to get your bench guys as well. And it just becomes a who can gust who first. A big delineation is when playing against a Dragapult or Gardevoir with this deck. It's kind of obvious to some, but I'd explain it to my wife when she played. If you're playing against Gardevoir, do not leave the Poltergeists, because the Munkidores will snipe them. If you're playing against a Dragapult, leave the baby Poltergeists, because the Dragapult cannot hurt them because of this ability. You'll forget if you're not thinking about it, but that's a big way for them to get easy knockouts. And if the Gardevoir puts you on your back foot and you're trying to bench Poltergeist, they're just going to snipe them the Munkidores, and that could be a rough time of it. So the Teal Ogerpons can be more useful in those situations. That Dragapult likes to drop a couple damage counters on the Ogerpons, so they can then in turn hit 200 and knock them out. That would be a way that, if I practice the matchup more, would rely on the Machus Flatch to put 120, heal off the Teal masks and maybe itself a little bit, and then that would give me more time to hit a bench attack or go into a 210 once that 120 is taken off, because that 210 120 attack does turn to 330. So that's a great synergy there as well when you're hitting against those stage 2 decks. So it's not impossible, but in this everything gets knocked out at once format that we're dealing with, this deck struggles in that way. For an overall assessment, this is a fun deck for locals. Depending on what your locals are playing, you could pretty easily dominate. It will struggle in a meta-heavy Gardevoir Dragapult if you're playing multiple of them over and over, but I've seen this deck and played this deck into Dragapults and Gardevoirs and won. I can't say for sure if that's a minority or majority of the time. I believe over 100 games, this deck would be the one that slowed down a bit, but it's definitely not a 70-30 situation at all. I just can't give this one a seal of approval for a meta pick. My biggest concern is that we're about to hit that rotation, and the Wyrdeer V is about to rotate, and that's a really, really big attacker pulled off the board, so we can hope that in a future set we get a Wyrdeer V replacement. Maybe it just gets replaced with a Blood Moon, and you're worried about, 2 hitting knockouts and such. That'll probably be the first thing to do, but we'll see if this deck stays seeing play without the Wyrdeer backup. That is all I have to say about this deck today. Please leave a comment and help me develop my strategy here. My goal is to dig a little bit deeper into a deck or present it in a more broad way like this than what a decklist video could do, or a too long video watching someone play it on TCGLive. I'd rather give you the lowdown this way, so you can copy the deck list, put it into TCGLive and play it yourself, and save you time, and really save me time from spending too much time recording myself on a broken platform playing the game. So I'll drop the deck list in the comments. Again, let me know what you think, help me develop this better for you, and until next time, have a good one.